Hey, this is Tom Webster, and this is Sounds Profitable for Wednesday, February 14th, 2024. Valentine's Day for those who celebrate. I will, of course, be in Valentine's services with my family in keeping with our culture. Today's article and podcast is called The Subtle Key to Podcasting's Persuasiveness. Miles of article inches have been written about podcasting's persuasiveness, but NPR's recent podcast, Body Electric, takes audience engagement to a new physical level. But first, with the rapid growth of podcasting in recent years, Sounds Profitable and Magellan AI created the Podscape, an easy-to-navigate guide to the companies and services that make up podcasting. As of this morning, the Podscape has been updated for early 2024, collating dozens of new additions. Check it out now. The link will be in the show notes. And if your podcasting company is not yet represented, please email podscape@magellan.ai to be included in the next update later this year. Well, you know, the host relationship in podcasting is something we talk about a lot, but rarely do we break it down any further than that into its component parts. Now, a host can be funny or knowledgeable or otherwise entertaining, but that's true of our favorite YouTube creators and likely true of the stars of our favorite TV shows, too. There's another element that, when it is present, unlocks a whole new level of trust and persuasiveness in podcasting that makes them incredibly persuasive, and that is empathy. This really crystallized for me when I learned about the recent success of Body Electric, which was a short podcast series produced by NPR and hosted by the host of TED Radio Hour, Manoush Zomorodi. The show's premise was a grand experiment. Could a podcast get people to move a little more? Dr. James Levine once coined the phrase, "sitting is the new smoking," to describe the impact that spending a day in our chairs is having on our lifespan and health span. He believes that every sedentary hour we spend in a chair, like the one I'm spending right now, could cost us up to 2 hours of life. We know podcasts can sell mattresses and food delivery services, but can they possibly combat a trend that COVID-related lockdowns have seemingly exacerbated? Well, that was the question behind the Body Electric podcast, which partnered with Columbia University Medical Center for a study unlike any other. This collaboration sought to understand if regular movement breaks could significantly impact our increasingly sedentary, tech-dominated lifestyles. Could a podcast transform its audience from mere listeners to active participants? And that's precisely what Manoush, who spends a lot of her time focusing on the intersection between technology and our physical lives, wanted to find out. The results, really the outcomes, were extremely positive, so much so that I wanted to pick Manoush's brain about how and why so many people participated in this and what other exportable insights she would take to other podcasts and shows in the future. So I sat down with her and asked her to share what she learned. And from the start, she said, "We wanted to see, was this possible? And we didn't know the answer. We started off the podcast being like, we're going to tell you how all these different technologies impact your body, and we're also going to invite you to participate in this study." Body Electric tapped into the unique relationship between podcast hosts and their audience that we always talk about in advertising, and really showed its power in changing lifestyle behaviors. Manoush harnessed this connection, inviting her listeners to join the Columbia experiment by moving more throughout the day and committing to taking a 5-minute walk break every half hour to combat the effects of sitting. The response was extraordinary, transcending mere data collection. "I think our researchers at Columbia were overwhelmed by the response," Manoush recalled. "People are going to be into this." Over 20,000 people signed up and joined the study, taking varying numbers of walk breaks daily and reporting their fatigue levels and emotional state throughout the experiment. The results overwhelmingly positive. Fatigue was reduced by 25%, and the more people moved, the better they felt. To some, this might be counterintuitive. If you were tired, why would moving more make you feel less fatigued? Even participating in this study required some respondents to fight against this apparent cognitive dissonance, getting up and moving anyway because a podcast asked them to. The podcast didn't just gather data, it sparked a movement. The preliminary findings pointed to the benefits of the prescribed movement breaks, but the real success lay in the depth of listener engagement. This wasn't just an audience, but a community taking a collective step towards better health. As Manoush told me, the feedback loop between the listeners, the podcast, and then the listeners is a beautiful thing. It was that feedback loop that Manoush singled out as one of the things she would keep top of mind in any future podcast or show that she works on. We don't often think of podcasts as truly interactive. Still, where a visible and transparent feedback system can be seen and contributed to by an audience, they can become more than just passive bystanders. And this may have played a role in listeners' compliance with the movement breaks. But there was something more profound than that going on, which led to the success of the Body Electric experiment. Here's how Manoush put it. I think it does come back to talking to people about problems they've sensed they had, but couldn't put words to. When you're able to explain to someone through a story or reporting or just talking in conversation, if you're making the listener think, oh my God, that's exactly how I feel. Thank you. Yes, this is it. That sort of moment of feeling seen, ironically, by a podcaster, that's a connection that they will be very loyal to if they feel understood. Of course, the Body Electric audience is intelligent and they aren't going to do things just because a podcast tells them to. And that's where the Columbia University connection really came in. There was actual compelling science behind moving 5 minutes more every half hour. Manoush singled this point out. I think our podcast listeners want to know why. Why should I do it? So we get into the stories behind the research, why the research was done, who are the people doing the research, and then issue this call to action. Well, as my brilliant wife Tamsin often points out to her clients, we're not rational decision makers. We are rationalizing decision makers. We often make decisions intuitively and then find the logical means to justify them after the fact. Now, this means that the research alone isn't enough. The real magic happened with the secret sauce of Body Electric, a shared experience. One of the strengths we often tout about podcasting is that it's on-demand and personal. But a skilled podcaster can make personal feel communal. This was always one of the keys to success for organizations like Weight Watchers, for example. It's one thing for you to read a book about dieting, but Weight Watchers also knew that your chances of losing weight and their chances of creating a happy, loyal customer hinged on getting you to go to actual meetings. Manoush raised this very phenomenon in our conversation. There's something compelling in knowing that as you listen to the podcast, thousands or even tens of thousands of other people are also listening and giving it a go. That's what we love about media like Monday Night Football or watching a live concert. We want to be with groups. We want to be together and feel like we're moving the needle to have meaning. If you tell people that you yourself are going to make a change and you're going to do it with like-minded people, well, guess what? You might change the way society looks at movement and screen time, and that's pretty cool. Ultimately, it's that last bit that I think really led to the success of Body Electric. You need the basic science to make sense, of course, and the sense of a shared experience certainly provides motivation. But the real key, something Manoush is too modest to say. Manoush herself. When a podcast host isn't just instructing an audience, but telling them they're going on this journey with them as an equal, this activates one of the unique superpowers of podcasting, and one we don't speak precisely enough about, the power of empathy. When a podcast can truly tap into empathy and authentically communicate to an audience that the host isn't talking down to them or lecturing them, but actually in the swim of life with them and sharing their struggles, there's nothing more powerful. If this person you identify with and makes you feel heard can make a change in their life, so can we all. And podcasting, almost uniquely among digital media channels, provides the opportunity to channel genuine empathy into potentially changing lives and not just selling motor oil. In that sense, the lessons of Body Electric extend beyond advertising to nearly any critical communication. Are you trying to navigate a culture shift within an organization? A podcast featuring your peers who are also navigating the changes is better than a video from the CEO. The same is true for communicating a company's values to the outside world after it has acquired another company or has been acquired. And of course, apropos of this podcast, there might be no better way for organizations, healthcare companies, and insurance providers to encourage meaningful changes to our health span than podcasts featuring people we identify with, making those same changes with us. For organizations like that, a podcast should potentially be the first line of communication. But even if you're an individual podcaster, there's a lesson to be learned here about empathy. the more you can make an audience feel like you're on the journey with them, the more likely they are to take the first step, whatever that might be. The story of Body Electric proves that podcasts have the power to inform, entertain, and most importantly, mobilize and enact tangible change. The challenge now lies in harnessing this potential. With a microphone in hand and a world of listeners tuned in, every episode can be a step toward action, improvement, and collective advancement. As Manoush aptly put it, it's not just for you, it's for our culture. The journey has just begun, and the possibilities here are endless. So let's embrace this opportunity and make every word count with a little empathy. Surely, that's not a bad thing. Thanks again for listening to this podcast, The Subtle Key to Podcasting's Persuasiveness. This episode is hosted on Spreaker. I'm Tom Webster, and I'll see you next time.